The Vance mansion wasn't a home. It was a beautiful, silent museum. It sat on a huge piece of land surrounded by perfect green lawns and tall fences. From the outside, it looked like a dream, but inside the air was cold and still. The white walls were bare, the glass tables held nothing but expensive, lonely-looking statues, and the floors were so shiny they reflected the emptiness of the place. This was the world of a man named Arthur Vance, a billionaire who had built a technology empire. His company, Vance Innovations, was a household name, known for smart gadgets and complex software. But in his own house there was very little warmth or life. Arthur was a man who lived inside his own head, always thinking about business, deals, and the next big thing. He moved through his house like a busy ghost, his mind always somewhere else. His wife, a woman named Eleanor, was like a beautiful painting on the wall. She was always dressed perfectly, but her eyes were sad and distant. She spent her days organizing charity events and attending fancy parties. But these were just things she did to fill the silence. She and her husband barely spoke, and when they did, it was about schedules or public appearances. Their real lives were hidden away from the world. The heart of their quiet sadness was their 10-year-old son, Leo. Leo was a small boy with thoughtful eyes that saw everything. He had autism and did not speak. The world was too loud, too bright, and too confusing for him most of the time. His parents loved him in their own way, but they did not understand him. To his father, Leo was a complex problem that the best doctors and money could not fix. To his mother, he was a source of a deep private pain that she tried to cover up with a smile. Because they did not know what else to do, they filled Leo's life with experts. A parade of therapists, tutors, and special nannies moved through the mansion on a strict timetable. They worked with Leo on speaking, on social skills, on controlling his emotions. Their voices were always calm and professional, but their touch was clinical. They were trying to teach him how to live in a world that made him uncomfortable. But no one ever tried to join him in his own world. Leo spent his free time in his playroom, a place filled with expensive educational toys, but he always returned to his favorites, a set of intricate metal gears. He would sit for hours, connecting them, spinning them, watching how they fit together perfectly. The predictable movement seemed to calm his mind. Sometimes, when his father left his personal laptop open on his desk, Leo would sit quietly in the big office chair, his small frame almost disappearing into it. He would stare at the lines of code on the screen, his eyes following the patterns. He didn't see confusing text. He saw a beautiful, logical dance. But no one knew this. To everyone, he was just staring blankly at a screen. This was the world that a woman named Malia entered every evening. She was part of the night cleaning crew, a person everyone looked through as if she were invisible. She was a little older, with kind eyes and hands that were worn from a lifetime of hard work. She worked 2 jobs, and all her efforts were for one goal: to put her own daughter through college. To the Vance family, she was just the help, a silent figure who wiped their counters and mopped their floors. Malia moved through the huge, quiet house with a soft rustle of her cleaning cloths. She saw the expensive things, the perfect order, but she also saw the things money couldn't buy. She saw the loneliness in Eleanor's expensive perfume that hung in the air. She saw the frustration in the way Arthur's papers were scattered on his desk. And most of all, she saw the little boy in the big, quiet house. She noticed things about Leo that others missed. The nannies saw a boy who just lined up his blocks. Malia saw that he arranged them in a specific, repeating sequence, a mathematical pattern. They saw a child having a tantrum. She saw a child who was overwhelmed and scared because a picture frame had been moved 2 inches from its usual spot. She saw that his silence wasn't empty. It was full of things he couldn't find a way to say. One evening, while cleaning his playroom, she found one of his gear systems left on the floor. Instead of moving it, she knelt down and looked at it. She saw the cleverness in its design. The next night, she did something small and simple. As she finished cleaning, she placed a small, smooth, dark stone right next to his gears. It was just a stone from her walk to the bus stop, but it had an interesting round shape. The next evening, the stone was gone from the floor. She saw it now had a place of honor on Leo's windowsill, sitting perfectly centered. A tiny, invisible thread of connection had been spun. She didn't smile or make a big deal of it. She just continued her work. But the next night, she left a pine cone with a near-perfect spiral next to his blocks. The night after that, it was a feather, striped with different shades of brown. She never spoke to him during these exchanges. She would just hum a soft old gospel song her grandmother used to sing, a tune about weathering storms and finding peace. It was a sound completely different from the clinical voices of the therapists or the tense silence of his parents. It was a sound that felt like a warm blanket. Leo never looked at her directly, but he was aware of her. His body was less tense when she was in the room. He started to leave things for her too. One night he left one of his gears in the middle of the clean floor, a clear invitation. She picked it up, held it to the light as if studying it, and placed it back gently on his table. This was their silent conversation. In a house full of people, a billionaire's son and a poor cleaning woman had started to build a bridge, one made of quiet understanding, small objects, and a gentle humming tune. And for the first time in a very long time, Leo felt a little less alone. The silent friendship between the boy and the cleaning woman grew slowly, like a plant in a hidden corner of the garden. It was not something you could see with a quick look. It was in the small, quiet details. Malia continued her routine. Every evening she would push her cleaning cart into Leo's playroom. She would give a soft, low hum to let him know she was there. He would usually be in his own world, spinning his gears or looking at a picture book. He never turned to look at her, but his shoulders would relax just a little when he heard her sound. Their game of leaving things for each other continued. One night Malia left a piece of red ribbon tied in a simple bow. Leo in turn started leaving drawings for her. They weren't drawings of people or houses. They were patterns. Intricate mazes, spirals that got smaller and smaller, and beautiful, complex designs that looked like snowflakes or stars. He would leave them on the floor, right in the spot where she would need to mop. It was his way of talking to her. She would pick each one up, study it carefully, and place it safely on his desk before she cleaned the spot. She never threw one away. One evening, the atmosphere in the mansion felt different even before Malia stepped inside. There was a tension in the air. She could hear the sharp, worried voice of Leo's newest nanny, a young woman who always seemed nervous. As Malia got closer to the playroom, the sounds became clearer. It was the sound of crying, not a sad cry, but a frantic, panicked one. It was Leo. She stood at the doorway and looked in. Leo was sitting on the floor, his knees pulled to his chest, rocking back and forth. His face was red and wet with tears, and he was making loud, distressed sounds. His whole little body was tight with fear and overwhelm. The nanny was kneeling in front of him, her voice high and strained. "Leo, sweetie, you have to calm down. Please take a deep breath. Look at me, just breathe," she pleaded, trying to reach for his hands. But her words and her reaching hands only made it worse. They were like more noise, more pressure, adding to the storm inside his head. He flinched away from her touch, his cries growing louder and more desperate. The nanny looked up, her face pale with panic, and saw Malia standing there. "I don't know what happened," the nanny whispered frantically. "He just lost it. I can't get him to stop." Malia looked at the scene. She saw the nanny's fear. She saw the boy's terror. She knew what the experts would say. Use a firm but calm voice, establish control, guide him through the steps. But Malia saw something else. She saw a child who was drowning in a sea of his own feelings, and everyone was shouting instructions from the shore. She didn't rush in. She didn't speak. She quietly set her cleaning spray and cloth down on her cart. She walked slowly into the room, but she didn't go towards Leo. Instead, she went to the far corner near the window and sat down on the floor. She made herself small and non-threatening. The nanny stared at her, confused. "What are you doing?" "You need to help me." Malia just gave a small, gentle shake of her head and looked towards the door, silently asking the nanny to leave. For a moment, the nanny hesitated, but the sight of the calm cleaning woman versus the escalating crisis made her decision. She got up and hurried out of the room, leaving Malia alone with the sobbing boy. Leo was still lost in his distress. He hadn't even noticed the change. Malia sat cross-legged on the cool floor. She didn't look directly at him. She knew that could feel like a demand. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her cleaning uniform and pulled out her small notepad and a pencil. She remembered the gears. She remembered how he loved their perfect, predictable order. She started to draw. She drew a big gear. Then she drew a smaller one next to it, trying to connect them. But she drew the teeth of the gears wrong. On the big gear, the teeth pointed out, and on the small one, she also drew them pointing out. It was an impossible machine. They could never turn together. She didn't say a word. She just kept drawing this broken, useless gear system. Slowly, through his tears and his own world of pain, Leo's sharp eyes noticed the wrongness. A pattern was broken. His mind, which craved order and logic, was pulled towards the problem. His frantic rocking slowed. His loud cries softened to hiccups and whimpers. He was still upset, but his focus was shifting from the internal storm to the external mistake. He watched her hand as it drew the flawed design. A deep frown appeared on his wet face. It was wrong. It was all wrong. After a few minutes, he uncurled his body. Still sniffling, he crawled across the carpet towards her. He didn't look at her face. His eyes were locked on the notepad. When he was close, he reached out a small, trembling hand. Malia stayed perfectly still. She didn't move away, but she didn't reach for him either. She simply loosened her grip on the pencil. His fingers touched it. He carefully took the pencil from her hand. His breathing was still shaky, but his hand was steady. He bent over the notepad, his brow furrowed in concentration. With sure, clear lines, he redrew the teeth of the smaller gear. He made them point inward, so they would fit perfectly into the teeth of the larger one. He drew a line showing how they would turn together, a smooth, continuous motion. He fixed her mistake. When he was done, he dropped the pencil on the notepad and sat back, his body finally relaxing. The storm had passed. The silence that returned to the room was no longer tense or empty. It was a peaceful, understanding silence. Malia looked down at the drawing. She nodded slowly, as if he had just explained a great truth to her. She picked up the notepad and looked at it with genuine respect. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Now they can work." For the first time since she had known him, Leo's eyes flickered upwards and met hers for a single, fleeting second. There was no smile, but there was a recognition, a connection. In that quiet moment, in a room that had just held so much pain, they had built their first real bridge. And it was stronger than anyone could have imagined. The air in the Vance mansion was different tonight. It was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the low, busy sound of many people talking. The grand hall, usually so silent and empty, was now filled with life. Men in perfectly tailored suits and women in glittering dresses stood in small groups, their laughter sounding like sharp, polished bells. This was the annual summer gala, the biggest event of the year for the family. For Arthur Vance, it was a stage to show his power and success. For his wife, it was a performance of a perfect life. For their son, Leo, it was a nightmare. He stood near the grand staircase, dressed in a stiff, uncomfortable suit. The lights from the giant crystal chandelier were too bright, hurting his eyes. The sound of the string quartet mixed with the 100 different conversations, creating a painful, confusing noise in his head. It was like being inside a beehive. He could feel the vibrations of the music and the talking through the soles of his shoes. Every flash of a camera was a small lightning strike. He held his body very still, trying to make himself small, trying to build a wall inside his mind to block it all out. His mother stood nearby, a beautiful, nervous smile fixed on her face. She would occasionally put a light hand on his shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like a weight. "Just a little longer, sweetheart," she would whisper, but her own tension made everything worse. Across the room, Arthur Vance was in his element. He stood with a group of important-looking investors, a glass of champagne in his hand, talking about his newest project. "The future of artificial intelligence," he announced, his voice confident and loud. "A system that can learn and adapt like never before." He was so caught up in his own words, so proud of the world he was building inside a computer, that he was completely blind to the world falling apart just a few feet away from him. It was a woman's loud, shrieking laugh that finally broke the dam inside Leo. The sound was so sudden, so sharp, it sliced right through the fragile wall he had built. His hands flew to his ears, his eyes squeezed shut. A low, pained moan escaped his lips, which quickly turned into loud, frantic sobs. His whole body began to rock, and he slid down to sit on the floor, curling into a ball right at the bottom of the grand staircase. The perfect party froze. The music seemed to falter. The conversation stopped. All eyes turned to the small, suited boy crying on the floor. It was a scene of pure public distress. The guests didn't know what to do. They looked away. They whispered behind their hands, their faces a mixture of pity and discomfort. Arthur's face turned a dark red. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure anger and humiliation. This was his moment, and his son was ruining it. He saw the investors looking, their polite smiles now strained. He saw this as a personal failure, a stain on his perfect image. "Eleanor," he hissed, striding over. "Do something." "Get him out of here." His wife was paralyzed, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shame and fear. She knelt down, trying to speak to Leo, but her voice was trembling and her touch was shaky. "Leo, baby, please, not here." Everyone is watching. Her words were like adding fuel to a fire. The nanny, who had been hovering nearby, rushed in and tried to pull his hands away from his ears, which only made him cry out and flail, his movements becoming more frantic. It was a mess of panic, embarrassment, and the wrong kind of help. They were all trying to stop the noise, but no one was trying to understand the storm. Malia was in a hallway, polishing a silver vase that was worth more than a year of her salary. She heard the sudden change in the party's noise. She heard the distinct sound of a child's cry cutting through the polite chatter. Her head snapped up. She knew that cry. It was Leo's pain cry. She put her cloth down. She knew her place. She was the cleaner. She was supposed to stay in the shadows, unseen and unheard. To walk into that party was unthinkable. It was crossing a line that could cost her the job she desperately needed. But she remembered the boy on the floor, fixing her drawing. She remembered the trust in his eyes. She thought of him, surrounded by all that noise and light and pressure with no one who understood. She didn't think about her job. She didn't think about the rich people in their fine clothes. She only thought about the child. She walked. She didn't run, but her steps were quick and sure. She pushed open the heavy door to the main hall. The scene hit her like a wave. The staring crowd, the furious father, the helpless mother, the panicked nanny, and in the center of it all, her little friend, lost and drowning. Without a moment's hesitation, she walked straight through the crowd. People moved aside, not out of respect, but out of shock. Who was this woman in a simple cleaning uniform, walking with such purpose into the heart of their fancy party? She ignored Arthur's glare. She ignored the guests' whispers. She walked right past the nanny and knelt on the cold marble floor in front of Leo. She didn't try to pull his hands away. She didn't tell him to be quiet or that everything was okay. She didn't even look at the crowd. She simply got down on his level. She held out her own hands, palms up, empty and open, a safe space. And then she began to hum. It was the same soft, low gospel tune she hummed while cleaning his room. The tune about peace and calm. It was a tiny, familiar sound in an ocean of chaos. For Leo, that hum was a lifeline. It was a pattern he knew. It was a sound that meant safety. His loud sobs hitched. His rocking slowed. His hands pressed tightly against his ears, loosened just a little. He slowly opened his eyes, wet with tears. He saw her worn hands held out for him. He saw her face, calm and kind. He saw a person who wasn't asking anything from him, who wasn't ashamed of him, who was just there. The entire ballroom was utterly silent. Watching this unbelievable scene, slowly, carefully, Leo unfolded one of his hands from his ear and placed it softly into Malia's waiting palm. His small, trembling fingers curled around her thumb. That single touch said more than words ever could. Still humming, Malia stood up, gently guiding him to his feet. She didn't pull him. She simply led and he followed, keeping his head down, his body leaning into hers for protection. She walked him step by step, away from the blinding lights, away from the staring eyes, away from the humiliation and the panic, and back towards the quiet, safe hallway. She left behind a room full of stunned silence, a billionaire father whose anger was now mixed with a deep, unsettling confusion, and a mother who was left with the haunting image of what true care actually looked like. The unthinkable act was done. The invisible woman had become the only one who could truly see. The grand hall remained frozen for a long moment after Malia and Leo disappeared. Then all at once the noise returned. It was not the happy chatter from before, but a low, buzzing hum of whispers. The guests tried to pretend nothing had happened, to pick up their conversations and their glasses. But the magic of the perfect evening was broken. Arthur Vance felt a hot wave of shame wash over him. He saw the sideways glances from the investors, their polite, tight-lipped smiles. He felt their judgment. In his world, image was everything, and tonight his image had cracked wide open for everyone to see. His first feeling was a blazing anger. How dare that woman? How dare she interrupt his event, embarrass him in front of his most important guests? His mind was already racing, thinking about which person to call to have her fired immediately. He turned to his wife, his voice a low, furious growl. "Did you see that?" "The audacity!" She is finished here. Tonight. But his wife was not looking at him. She was still staring at the empty space where her son had been. The look on her face was not anger. It was something else, something deeper and more painful. It was the look of someone who has just realized they have been looking in the wrong direction for a very long time. She had seen it. She had seen the way her son, who was screaming and terrified for them, had gone quiet for the cleaning woman. She had seen the way his small hand had reached for hers with a trust he had never, ever shown to his own mother. A sharp, cold needle of truth pricked her heart. "No, Arthur," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. She finally turned to look at him. "Did you not see what just happened? That woman..." She reached him. "We couldn't, his nanny couldn't, but she did." Arthur was too angry to listen. "She humiliated us. She helped our son." His wife shot back, her voice trembling with a new emotion. "While we were worried about the guests, she was the only one who was worried about him." The argument was cut short as they had to return to their roles as hosts, but the tension hung between them like a thick fog. The rest of the party was a blur. The music played, people talked, but the heart had gone out of the evening. The next morning the mansion was quiet again, but the silence felt different. It was heavy with the memory of the night before. Arthur was in his study, his anger having cooled into a cold, hard decision. He was going to fire Malia. It was a matter of principle. His wife found him there. "I want to speak with her first," she insisted. "Before you do anything, I want to understand." Arthur, frustrated but unable to deny the strange event, finally agreed. He would listen, but his mind was already made up. Later that afternoon, Malia was summoned to the study. She walked in, her head held high, but her hands were clasped tightly in front of her. She knew this was coming. She saw Arthur sitting behind his huge dark wood desk, his face like stone. His wife was sitting in a chair to the side, her expression anxious but curious. "Explain yourself," Arthur began, his voice cold and formal. "You disrupted a very important event. You overstepped your position in a very serious way." Malia took a slow breath. She was not a woman of many words, especially not to people like this. But she thought of Leo, and it gave her courage. "I was not thinking about your party, sir," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I was thinking about your boy." He was drowning in all that noise. Everyone was pulling at him, talking at him. It was too much. He needed a quiet place to land. She paused, gathering her thoughts. He talks in a different way. Not with words. He talks with patterns. With pictures. She then did something unexpected. She reached into the large pocket of her coat and pulled out a small worn notebook. It was the one she used for her silent conversations with Leo. "May I?" she asked, looking at Arthur's wife. The woman nodded, her eyes wide. Malia opened the notebook and placed it on the desk in front of Arthur. He glanced down, ready to dismiss it, but what he saw made him pause. The pages were filled not with childish scribbles, but with intricate, precise designs. There were complex geometric patterns, interlocking shapes that showed a deep understanding of symmetry, and page after page of those gear systems, each one more elaborate than the last. "These are our conversations," Malia said softly. "I would draw something wrong and he would fix it. This is how he shows what he is thinking." Arthur's wife leaned forward, her hand over her heart as she looked at the beautiful, logical art her son had created. "He did all this?" she whispered, her voice full of wonder. Arthur was still skeptical. "Drawing pictures is one thing," he said, though his tone was less harsh. "It doesn't change his condition." Malia looked directly at him. "Sir, have you ever wondered what he does when he sits at your computer? He is not just staring. He is reading. He understands it." Arthur let out a short, dismissive laugh. "That's impossible. It's advanced code. My best engineers spend years learning it." "Please," Malia said, her voice pleading now. "Just show him. Show him the project you were talking about last night. Put it on the screen. Don't ask him to speak. Just let him show you." Something in her certainty and the sheer boldness of the request made Arthur hesitate. He looked at his wife, who was looking at him with desperate hope in her eyes. With a sigh of irritation, he turned to his laptop. He pulled up the core code for his new AI project. It was a complex, dense wall of text and symbols, a language only a handful of people in the world could truly understand. He turned the screen toward the empty chair where Leo sometimes sat. "Fine," he said, his voice dripping with doubt. "Let him show me." Malia went to the door and gestured. Leo, who had been waiting nervously outside with his nanny, walked in slowly. He saw the laptop. He saw the code on the screen. His whole demeanor changed. The nervousness fell away, replaced by a deep, focused intensity. He walked to the chair, climbed up, and placed his small fingers on the keyboard. For a long minute, he just read, his eyes moving faster than anyone thought possible. Then he started to type. It wasn't random pressing. His fingers flew across the keys with a speed and certainty that was shocking to watch. Lines of code were deleted. New, more efficient lines were written in their place. He wasn't just fixing a small error. He was re-architecting a small but crucial part of the system, optimizing it in a way that was both brilliant and beautifully simple. Arthur Vance, the billionaire tech genius, leaned forward, his mouth slightly open. His eyes were glued to the screen, disbelieving. He watched as his son, the son he thought was broken, solved a problem that had been troubling his entire team for weeks. The room was so quiet you could hear the soft tap-tap-tapping of the keys. When Leo finished, he simply stopped, his hands resting in his lap. He did not look at his father for praise. He did not smile. He had simply completed the task. Arthur slowly stood up from his chair. He walked around the desk and stood behind his son, staring at the screen. The anger, the pride, the frustration, it all melted away, replaced by a single, overwhelming feeling, awe. He had been so busy looking for a son who could talk and act like other children that he had completely missed the prodigy living right under his own roof. The key to his biggest professional challenge had been sitting in the next room all along, silently waiting for someone to hand him the lock. He looked from his son's calm face to Malia's steady gaze. The woman he was going to fire had just given him the most valuable gift of his life. She had not just calmed his son down at a party. She had opened a door to a world he never knew existed. And for the first time, Arthur Vance was completely and utterly speechless. The days that followed the discovery in the study were a quiet revolution inside the Vance mansion. The change did not happen with loud arguments or dramatic speeches. It happened slowly, like the sun rising, gently lighting up corners that had been dark for years. Arthur Vance, the powerful billionaire, found himself in a place he rarely was, a student. He had to learn a new language, the silent language of his son. He spent hours in the study, not working on his own projects, but watching Leo. He learned to bring Leo his old laptops, not as a toy, but as a tool. He saw how his son's mind worked, not in a straight line, but in complex, beautiful patterns like a spider weaving a web of pure logic. He stopped trying to force his son to look him in the eye. He stopped demanding words that would not come. Instead, he learned to communicate through the things Leo loved. He would point to a line of code on the screen and then look at his son. Leo would then type a single, perfect line that fixed the problem. It was their first real conversation. One afternoon, Arthur brought home a large, complicated model engine kit. He didn't hand it to Leo with instructions. He simply opened the box and laid all the tiny pieces out on the floor of the playroom. Then he sat down, cross-legged, a good distance away. He picked up 2 pieces and tried to fit them together. He did it wrong, on purpose, just as Malia had drawn the gears wrong. Leo watched from his corner. He saw the mistake. After a few minutes, he crawled over. He didn't look at his father's face. He focused only on the pieces. He took them from his father's hands, his small fingers deftly rearranging them, connecting them the right way. Arthur didn't speak. He just nodded, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time in years. It was a start. For Leo's mother, the change was just as profound. The shame and embarrassment she had carried for so long began to melt away, replaced by a fierce, protective love. She saw now that her son was not less. He was different, and his difference was a kind of magic. She stopped trying to drag him to loud, overwhelming parties. Instead, she created a quiet space for him in the garden. She brought him books with intricate patterns and puzzles. She learned that a touch on the shoulder could mean more than a dozen words. She also found a new purpose. She used her social connections not for shallow parties, but for something real. She started a foundation to help other families with children like Leo. She talked openly about their journey, about the struggle and the loneliness, and about the cleaning woman who taught them how to see. For the first time, her public life and her private life were the same, and it filled her with a strength she never knew she had. And what of Malia? The morning after the meeting in the study, Arthur had called her back in. He was a proud man, and apologizing did not come easily to him. But he tried. "I was wrong," he said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. We need your help. Leo needs your help. I'm offering you a new position. You would be his companion, his facilitator. You would help us. Help us talk to him. The pay will be more than fair." Malia listened quietly. The money he mentioned was a life-changing amount. It would mean her daughter's college tuition would be paid without any more sleepless nights. It would mean security. But she looked him in the eye. "I will accept," she said, "but not for the money. I will accept for the boy, and I will only stay if my role is respected. I am not a servant in this. I am his friend." Arthur nodded, understanding the terms completely. From that day on, Malia was no longer part of the invisible cleaning crew. She became a steady, calming presence in the house. She was the bridge between Leo's world and his parents' world. She showed them how to read his moods, how to offer comfort without pressure, how to see the brilliant mind working behind his quiet eyes. Months passed. The mansion began to feel less like a museum and more like a home. There was still quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, not an empty one. Laughter was heard sometimes, real laughter, not the polite kind from parties. The final scene of this chapter of their lives took place in the garden. It was a warm, sunny afternoon. The flowers were in bloom and the air was sweet. Leo was sitting at a small wooden table. His father sat beside him. Between them was a tablet, its screen filled with the colorful lines of a new game Arthur's company was developing. Leo was tapping the screen, moving characters and solving puzzles with a speed that was breathtaking. His father watched, his expression one of pure wonder and pride. Suddenly, Leo stopped. He looked from the screen to his father's face. He then typed a single word on the tablet and turned it towards his father. The word was bug. He pointed to a tiny, almost invisible glitch in the game's code that Arthur had missed. Arthur stared at the word, then at the glitch, and then back at his son's serious face, and he laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a deep, joyful, from-the-belly laugh that echoed in the garden. It was the sound of a wall crumbling down forever. Leo did not laugh back. But he watched his father, and a small, quiet light came into his eyes. It was the closest thing to a smile he had ever given. Malia watched this from a few steps away, holding a tray of cool drinks. She did not interrupt. She simply stood and watched the family they had become. The billionaire had learned that the greatest fortune wasn't in his bank account, but in the quiet boy at the table. The mother had found her strength not in society, but in her own home. And the boy had finally found his voice not in spoken words, but in a language of logic and love that his family had finally learned to speak. Malia smiled, a small, satisfied smile. Her unthinkable act had not just calmed a boy during a party. It had rebuilt a family, and that was a reward far greater than any salary.